On the words Reuven b'choiri ato etc. Yeser se'es v'yeser oz pachas kamayim al toisar, which means Yaakov is telling Reuven, you should have really been superior in rank and superior in power, etc. Rashi explains, Yeser says, you were deserving, you were fit to be superior to your brothers. In kahuna, meaning that you should have koyanim coming out of you. The word se'es over here is from the same word as nesiyus kapayim, as duchening, so you should have been the ones to have koyanim coming from you. The yeser oz, you should have been the one having more power as in malchus, and as in kings coming out of you. What caused you to lose all of these special advantages? As the pasuk says further, pachas kamayim. Pachas means the haste, the confusion, the fact that you rush to show your anger, which, as Rashi goes further and explains, this is referring to the time when Reuven moved Yaakov's bed from Bilhah's tent into Leah's tent. This is why al toisar, as the pasuk goes further and says, you're not going to have all of these extra benefits that you really were deserving to have. Now, the Targum translates the pasuk, that really Reuven was deserving to have 3 portions. B'choira, to have the birthright, Kohuna, to have koyanim coming out of him, and to have kingship coming out of him. And all of these were not given to him. And this is actually the way the Tanchum and the Bereshis Rabbah put it as well. So we need to understand, since the pasuk does mention the idea of b'choira, Reuven b'choiriata, why is it that Rashi learns that the words al toisar, that he's not going to get those advantages, is only referring to the words yeser se'es v'yeser oz, which, as Rashi explains, refers to Kohuna and Malchus? Why does it not refer to the idea that Reuven b'choiri ato, which says in the beginning of the pasuk that Reuven really is the b'choir? And in fact, the reason why he's deserving to Kohuna and Malchus is because he is the b'choir. So why is it that Rashi omits mentioning this point, that he loses also the birthright, the b'choira? Says the Rebbe, we cannot say that according to Rashi, Pshutei Shel Mikra, the b'choira is not taken away from Reuven, because there's a clear pasuk in Divrei Hayamim where the pasuk says, Uvenei Reuven b'choir Yisrael, etc. And the pasuk goes on, Ubechala lo yitzuei aviv, because he defiled the bed of his father, Nitna b'choirase, the b'choira was given to the children of Yosef, and so on. Furthermore, not only is this a pasuk elsewhere, Rashi himself, a few psukim back, explains, according to one of the pirushim in Rashi there, on the word Shchem Achad, where Yaakov is telling Yosef what he's giving him. Rashi explains, Shchem means one portion. What I'm giving you an additional portion over the other brothers. This is referring to the b'choira, to the birthright, that the children of Yosef are going to get a double portion. They're going to get 2 portions. There's going to be 2 shvatim coming from Yosef. Even earlier in Parshas Vayishlach, Rashi explained on the words b'choir Yaakov, that b'choir Reuven was meant to be is the b'choir lenachla, for getting an inheritance. He's a b'choir la'avodah, the b'choir for serving in the Beis Hamikdash. B'choir leminyan, a b'choir when the Yidden are counted, Reuven is counted first. And b'choira was only given to Yosef only as far as the matter of the shvatim, that it turns into 2 shvatim. But in other words, what we see over here is that at least to a certain extent, as far as b'choira is, as far as the shvatim are concerned, the b'choira is taken away from Reuven, again because of the same story as Rashi explains over there, because of the story of Reuven moving the bed of Yaakov, and it was given to Yosef. So therefore, we're back to the question, why does Rashi over here not learn that the b'choira is also taken away from him because of this story? Why only Kohuna and Malchus? Says the Rebbe, seemingly we can explain it from the diuk of the pasuk itself. The pasuk says, Al toisar, you're not going to get certain benefits. And the pasuk is using this term, Al toisar, So therefore, it's coming to tell us that what is Reuven losing? The things that the pasuk specifically in this pasuk refers to as things in a similar expression as toisar, these yeseres, these extra advantages that Reuven would have. Which what are the things mentioned in the pasuk? Yeser sa'es veyeser oz, which is kahuna and malchus, as we explained earlier. So in other words, when the pasuk says al toisar, it's specifically referring to the words that the Torah used regarding Reuven, that he should have had yeser seis and yeser oz, which is kahuna and malchus, and that's what he's going to lose because of pachas kamayim, because of his haste in moving the beds, etc. As opposed to the idea of b'choira, which in our pasuk we don't find that being termed with this expression yeser, and therefore we also don't apply the words al toisar, that you're not going to get these advantages. This is not included, and that's why Rashi doesn't mention it. Says the Rebbe, okay, very nice. This is only a proof from the wording of the pasuk what the pasuk is referring to. That here we're not speaking about the fact that Reuven loses the b'choira, but the question still remains on the actual idea itself. In other words, on the pasuk itself. Why, in fact, is b'choira different to kahuna and malchus? That the pasuk is only telling us about Reuven losing the kahuna and malchus, and not regarding the idea of losing the b'choira. Again, losing it at least as far as the idea of getting two shvatim coming out of him. The Rebbe now moves on to another pasuk. Regarding Yehuda, the pasuk says, Gur Arya Yehuda, so Yehuda is compared to a young lion. Miteref b'ni olisa. Miteref means from prey or devouring. You have ascended. B'ni, my son, will soon see where this refers to. So Rashi explains. Miteref, from what I, Yaakov, had suspected you, in Toroif Toirov Yosef, I suspected you that when Yaakov was told that a wild beast had consumed Yosef, Yaakov was actually suspecting that the Shvatim had killed him, and more particularly that Yehuda had killed him, referring to Yehuda, because Yehuda is compared to a lion, as we just saying over here, Gur Arya Yehuda. Yehuda is compared to a lion. So Yaakov suspected that Yehuda had killed Yosef. So Mitera, from this devouring, B'ni Alisa, my son, you have descended. You have ascended. Silakta atzmacha, you removed yourself. In other words, you didn't actually kill him. You actually caused that Yosef should be saved. You're the one that said, Ma betza, what are we going to gain by killing Yosef, etc. So instead of Yehuda being the one that killed Yosef, Yaakov is saying, Yehuda, you're actually the one that saved Yosef. Then Rashi goes on and says, V'chein ba'harigas Tamar, so too when it came that Tamar was nearly killed. Again, Yehuda saved her, because he admitted and he said, Sadka mimeni, that she is the one that is right, and so on. So we need to understand, from the fact that Rashi adds the words, V'chein ba'harigas Tamar, that so too Yehuda ended up saving Tamar. In other words, he had removed himself or elevated himself from causing that Tamar should be killed. And he only mentions it over here on these words, on B'ni Olisa, not on the words Miteref. So again, the pasuk said Miteref B'ni Olisa, but Rashi says this whole business with Tamar only on the words B'ni Olisa. It seems to be implying that the words of the Chen B'harigas Tamar is not referring to the word Miteref, in other words, devouring or killing. And that would be that you also removed yourself from killing Tamar. That's the way the Medrash understands it, that the word miteref means from killing Tamar. But rather, Rashi seems to be understanding it from the word b'ni alisa, you have ascended. In other words, alisa means you have ascended, you have removed yourself from, first of all, killing Yosef, as well as from causing Tamar's death. So the question is, since the words B'ni Alisa, Miteref B'ni Alisa is directly coming in continuation to the word Miteref, how could you possibly separate and say that the word Miteref refers to one thing, the Torah of Yosef, removing himself from killing Yosef, and B'ni Alisa, the very next words, is referring to two things, the killing of Yosef as well as Tamar. Another thing, says the Rebbe, we don't understand is, why in Pshutei Shel Mikra is there any necessity at all to say that the word Alisa over here, that Yehuda is elevating himself or removing himself from a certain murder, why do we have to say that this Yaakov has in mind over here not only the story with Yosef, but also the story with Tamar? Now Rashi does not say, as we mentioned before from Medrash, the Medrash speaks about this, but according to the Medrash, these are two different pirushim. Rashi seems to just be saying it in one flow. He says, V'chein b'harigas Tamar, that the same thing is true by Tamar. So the question is, why? How do we see from this pasuk that Tamar is included in this as well? Now, regarding the first question, which was, how can we separate from Miteref refers to the idea just of Yosef, and B'ni Elisa is going to refer to Yosef and Tamar, says the Rebbe, we can answer as follows. Rashi actually means that Miteref also refers to both Yosef and Tamar. When it said Miteref from a murder, from devouring someone, it did refer to Yosef and Tamar. The fact that Rashi is only saying it after B'ni Elisa, after he explains B'ni Elisa, he says, so too, besides Yosef, he also elevated himself from Harigas Tamar, is in order to explain to us how the word Miteref can even be referring to Tamar. In other words, yes, Miteref is going to refer to Tamar, but how could it refer to Tamar? Why not? So the Rebbe says like this. The way we look at the words Miteref, B'ni Elisa, there's actually two different ways of punctuating these words. There's two different ways to understand where the word B'ni belongs. Do we read it as Miteref B'ni, comma, and then Elisa? In other words, from devouring my son Yosef, you, Yehuda, had removed yourself, you have elevated yourself. Another way of understanding the word B'ni is that B'ni goes together with Elisa. Miteref, from the idea of killing, of murder. B'ni Elisa, you, my son Yehuda, you have elevated yourself. Now, if we translate it the first way, Miteref B'ni, from killing my son Yosef, Elisa, you have ascended Yehuda, so then we definitely cannot say that this refers to Tamar, because referring to the killing Miteref B'ni, from killing my son, which is Yosef, definitely cannot refer to Tamar. In order for Rashi to be able to tell us that this pasuk can be referring to Tamar as well, this is why before Rashi mentions Tamar, he first has to explain to us the word B'ni Elisa and tell us that the words B'ni Elisa go together. So first there's Miteref, and then Rashi is telling us in a separate Dibur HaMaschil, and as he quotes both words together in the Dibur HaMaschil, he says B'ni Elisa. Now the word B'ni really wouldn't even be so relevant over here, because all we're trying to say is what Elisa means, that you had removed yourself from a certain murder. Why is the word B'ni even important over here? But Rashi is trying to tell us that the word B'ni Elisa goes together, and only once we understand that Miteref is separate from a murder, B'ni Elisa, my son Yehuda, you have elevated yourself, now we could say, so now it can include two things, because Yehuda saved both Yosef as well as Tamar. Now, what's Rashi's proof that B'ni Elisa go together, that it can't be Miteref B'ni, from killing my son Yosef, have you, Yehuda, elevated yourself? Because remember, Yaakov is trying to praise Yehuda over here. We're about to say that as a result of this, he's going to get Malchus and so on and so forth. Now, if the word B'ni would have not said here at all, we would also understand that it refers to Yosef. Miteref, from murder, from devouring Yosef. Elisa, you have elevated yourself. We would know Teref refers to Yosef because that's the expression that we find earlier in the story of Yosef, of Toref, etc. So now when we're adding in the word B'ni, we're coming to emphasize the word B'ni, that wouldn't add any praise to Yehuda. In fact, on the contrary, if anything, it's taking away in a certain sense. You might say the only reason why Yehuda did anything to save someone is because it's Yaakov's son, Miteref B'ni Elisa, because it was Yaakov's son. That's why Yehuda went ahead and saved him. That's why Rashi is more comfortable in Pshutei Shel Mikra to say the second way. We're trying to give Yehuda a compliment. Miteref, from killing anyone, which could include Tamar as well. B'ni, my son Yehuda, you have elevated yourself. So now at least we understand that the word that B'ni Elisa can include Tamar as well. But the question still remains, yes, it can refer to Tamar, but what's forcing Rashi to say that Miteref is referring to two stories, both Yosef and Tamar, especially that the word Toiraf and Teref we don't find by Tamar. In order to explain all of this, the Rebbe now addresses a general question in the whole story. And that is, Malchus is taken away from Reuven and given to Yehuda. The Pasuk says in Divrei Hayamim, Ki Yehuda gavar be'achiv be'echav ulenagid mimenu. That Yehuda ends up prevailing over his brothers and he becomes the prince. His princes are going to be coming from him. Now Yaakov, this is what Yaakov means when he says the words Gur Arya Yehuda, he's going to be the lion, he's taking over, etc., etc. Rashi, in fact, explains clearly that this is the idea of Malchus, which is being given to David and Shloimeh, etc. The reason why it's being given to Yehuda, the Pasuk says itself, the Bracha says itself, Miterev b'ni Olisa, because of this story of saving Yosef, and as Rashi says, also Tamar. And as Rashi concludes his pirush on these words, Miterev b'ni Olisa, after saying, V'chein ba'arigas Tamar, he says, Lefichach, therefore, Karashach of Kari, therefore there's going to be all these ideas which refer to David and Shloimeh, etc. So the question is, this special quality of Yehuda, that he had removed himself from this murder, from the fact that Yaakov had suspected him in killing Yosef, and rather he went ahead and he saved him by saying, Ma Betza, what are we going to gain by killing him? We may as well sell him, etc. This idea, this very idea of saving Yosef, we have by Reuven as well. The Pasuk tells us in Parshas Vayeshev that Reuven is the one that said, Loi nakenu nefesh, let's not kill him. So just like Yehuda tried saving Yosef, Reuven tried saving Yosef. Also the special quality of Yehuda that we mentioned, that he went ahead and as a result of him admitting by the story of Tamar and saying, Tzadka mimeni. So now Tamar was saved, but this idea of Yehuda admitting and doing tshuva, again, we also find by Reuven admitting and doing tshuva for what he had done wrong. For this very story that we mentioned before of Chilalta Yitzui Allah, of moving the bed of his father. As Rashi explains in Parshas Vayeshev, that during the sale of Yosef, Yehuda is not there. Why? Because he was busy putting on sackcloth and fasting because of the story of moving his father's bed. In fact, says the Rebbe, in both of these stories, seemingly Reuven comes out at a much greater advantage than Yehuda, both in the saving of Yosef and in the story with Tamar, and the tshuva for that Yehuda and Reuven both did. So first of all, the fact that Yehuda saves Yosef from being killed was not with the intention of bringing him back to his father. Rather, he wants to sell him now to these Yishmaelim, to the Arabs. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, especially, Yehuda actually had the ability to bring Yosef back to his father if he wanted. As Rashi says, that the Shvatim tell him, Ilu Amarta, if you would have told him to us to return him to our father, we would have listened to you. Number two, says the Rebbe, when Yehuda says, what are we going to gain? Ma betza, Rashi says this means ma mamoin, what money are we going to gain out of all of this? That means the fact that he does not allow Yosef to be killed is because they're not going to gain any money out of it. And this is why he says, let's instead go and sell him to the Yishmaelim, so we're going to be able to earn money. So this is all with Yehuda. Whereas Reuven, he actually wanted to return him to Yaakov, to completely save him, as the Pasuk says clearly. Leman hatzil oisei miyodam, that he said this. In other words, to put him into the pit, etc. He said this in order because he wanted to come back and save him, lahashivoy alaviv, to bring him back to his father. Now let's look at the story where Yehuda admits what he has done wrong in the story of Tamar. So first of all, it's only a once-off, one time, one sentence. He says, Tzadka mimeni, she was right. She is justified. More importantly, in his case, it was obviously needed that he should say this. Because if not, if he's not going to admit, he's going to cause that Tamar should be killed, and the two fetuses that are within her, the two children she's about to give birth to. So it's obvious that Yehuda had to admit. But now let's look at Reuven. Reuven's tshuva is not a one sentence, a one-off tshuva. It's for many, many years that he's continuing to do tshuva. The Rebbe makes the calculation that Mechiras Yosef is approximately 9 years after the story of Reuven moving the bed. So for 9 years he's doing tshuva. Now, what kind of tshuva is he doing? He's involved with his sackcloth, with his fasting. And furthermore, the Rebbe says, this idea that Yehuda moved the beds can definitely not be compared that he's doing tshuva on something so serious as what Yehuda should have been doing tshuva for nearly killing someone. The Rebbe explains that, as Rashi says, Reuven did this because he was coming to demand and to claim for the honor of his mother that was being disgraced. In other words, he's doing it for kibudeim. In fact, it's not even considered as a sin, as Rashi says, that Reuven is still called B'choir at the time to teach us that are all tzaddikim, they're all equal, to teach us that Reuven did not sin, and therefore he's being called a B'choir even during the story, and yet Reuven is doing tshuva and doing so much tshuva. So in other words, again, if we speak about the idea that Yehuda, Miterev b'nei Elisa, he came and saved Yosef and he saved Tamar, seemingly, in both of these areas, Reuven comes out so much higher than Reuven. Reuven comes out so much higher than Yehuda. So how can we say that this is a reason why Yehuda deserves Malchus more than Reuven? Says the Rebbe, we're going to understand all of this by first looking at Yaakov's words to Reuven, where he says, Pachas kamayim, because you are hasty as water, al toisar, you're not going to get all of these advantages. As Rashi explains, what caused you to lose all of these things? Pachas kamayim, hapachas va'abahola, this shock, this confusion, this rushing, that you were hasty to show your anger. This is why you're not going to get these special advantages. And then as Rashi goes on to explain, what was this rush where he showed his anger was in this story with his father's beds. From Rashi's wording, it's understood that the reason why Reuven is losing these special qualities is not the actual story of moving Yaakov's bed. Rather, Pachas Kamayim, the haste that he showed to rush to show his anger. The only thing is, of course, the context in which it happened was in this particular story, a story of Elisa, Mishkevei Avicha, of moving the father's bed, etc. In other words, from the fact that Yaakov prefaces these words, and he emphasizes specifically this problem of Pachas Kamayim, Rashi learns out that in the story of Bilbo Yitzuei Aviv, there's actually two things going on. There's the actual act that Reuven did, and then there's the fact that he acted in this haste to show his anger. For each one of these two things, there is an individual and a specific punishment. For the fact that he moved his father's bed, B'choira was taken away from him to a certain extent, at least as we said before, to the concept that he doesn't have two shvatim coming out of him. As it says clearly in Divrei Hayomim, the pasuk we quoted earlier, because he defiled his father's bed, Nitna B'choirasa, his B'choira was given to someone else. And as Rashi brings in Parshas Vayishlach, we quoted before, that element of B'choira was given to Yosef. But then there's what our pasuk is speaking about. As a result of the Pachas Kamayim, that he's showing his anger quickly, Al Toisar, he's not going to get these specific advantages that we're talking about in our pasuk, the Kahuna and Malchus. Why is that? What's the explanation? Says the Rebbe, the difference between Kahuna and Malchus and the idea of B'choira is that the milos of Kahuna and Malchus are specifically expressed, specifically in our context, it's mainly in relation to other people. In other words, how you are dealing with other people. The idea of a melech, as the pasuk says, Asher Yetzi Lefneim, will go out in front of them, will lead them, and so on and so forth, take care of all the needs of the people of the country, of the city, etc., etc. And as Rashi also explains right over here on the words Gur Ari Yehuda, on the word Gur, Rashi says it means HaMoitzi VaMevi Es Yisrael, the one that takes the Yidden out, takes them in. On Kara Rovatz, again the pasuk referring to Yehuda, Ish Tachas Gafna, he's making sure everyone is comfortable under their grapevines, and so on and so forth. So the whole idea of a melech is to take care of his people. Kohuna in a similar way, one of the main ideas of Kohuna, as Rashi says right over here on the words Yeser Tzeis, he says it's in the word Nesiyus Kapayim, the idea of Duchani, that's benching Yidden. Kohanim are also the ones that need to teach the Yidden the halachas and the dini HaTorah, as the pasuk says, Uvasa el HaKohanim, you'll come to the Kohanim in your time and they'll tell you the laws. Al pi HaTorah Asher Yerucha, you need to be acting according to the law that they're going to tell you. So that's all Kahuna and Malchus. What about B'choira? B'choira is mainly a quality that's a relation to the B'choir himself. In other words, because he is standing on a certain high level, a certain high position, he is going to be getting double inheritance, but it's nothing to do with anybody else. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand these two details that we explained that happen as a result of what Reuven did. As a result of pachas kamayim, that he acted in a hasty way to show his anger, that as soon as he thinks and he decides that the bed of his father should be in the tent of Leah, he immediately gets angry. He's expressed it, this is applying to someone else. And he's immediately doing an act, showing his anger quickly, immediately moving his father's beds, again, impacting someone else. This, says the Rebbe, is a conduct that's in opposition of being concerned for the benefit of someone else. And this is why the punishment is midah keneged midah. He's losing out kahuna and malchus. As opposed to the actual act itself of moving his father's bed. In other words, not that rush and the haste, showing his anger immediately and all of that. The actual fact that he, in his mind, thought that this is the correct thing to do, shows that he had a certain mistaken calculation in his way of thinking because of kibud aim. He's saying, why should the maidservant of my mother be instead of the maidservant of my mother's sister, that's Rachel's maidservant, Bilhah, why should she be instead of my mother Leah? So he decides the bed of Yaakov should be moved to Leah's tent. So in other words, this is more a mistake or a mess up within himself in his own sort of way of thinking and calculation. Therefore, in a similar way to this, he loses that mila, that important quality that's related to himself, which is the idea of Bechorah. The Rebbe says, based on this, we're also going to understand a very, very fundamental chiluk that according to Rashi and Pshuta Shel Mikra, the Rebbe says, we find something very interesting. The general idea of Bechorah was actually not taken away from Reuven. He still remains the Bechorah as far as taking a double portion in inheritance and so on. In other words, what was taken away from him was only a certain aspect. As far as the Shvatim are concerned, he doesn't have two Shvatim coming from him. So that's in regards to Bechorah, that only a certain amount was taken away from him. But Kohuna and Malchus, he loses completely. Because the Rebbe explains, since we just said that the actual moving of the beds itself maybe is not as severe, as serious, because Reuven's intention was trying to put in a demand, a claim for the humiliation of his mother. And as Rashi says, we said before, Reuven didn't even sin. Even while he's messing up, he's being called Bechor. And he also has a very major tshuva for this. We said he's involved in sakoi v'tan nisoy, his sackcloth is fasting for many, many years. Therefore, only a certain element of the Bechorah is taken away from him. Again, as opposed to the Kohuna and Malchus, which are taken away completely. Says the Rebbe, now we could start understanding why it goes over to Yehuda, why Malchus is going over to Yehuda, because of saving Yosef and the story with Tamar, miterev b'nei Olisa. Even though we said before that Reuven seemingly had a much greater milah over Yehuda. So the Rebbe says the difference in the way miterev b'nei Olisa, the way Yehuda goes about saving Yosef and Reuven. So the Rebbe says, let's have a look what ends up being the result in both cases. As far as the person being saved, the other person, what benefit is the other person having from your efforts? Yehuda says, ma betza. What gain are we going to have? What's the end result? He ends up saving Yosef from, Yehuda says, ma betza kinar again. What benefit are we going to have if we kill him? So he ends up being saved from not being killed. And he's taken out of the pit that was filled with snakes and scorpions. So that's in the story of Yosef, but practically, Yosef ends up being saved because of Yehuda. And in the story of Tamar, when he says, Tzad kamimeni, that yes, Tamar is the one that's righteous, etc., Tamar ends up being saved from being burnt. What about by Reuven? Yes, on the one hand, his tshuva and his intentions were much greater than Yehuda's. But that's again only as far as Milo's qualities within him himself, but not as far as practically saving and doing somebody else a favor. So he comes along, Reuven says, Lo nakenu nefesh, let's not kill him. Let's throw him into this pit. And the Torah says clearly he had very good intentions in order to save him from their hands, in order to return him to his father. So that's his intentions. As far as his own greatness, yes, he's very great. But practically, what did Yosef benefit out of all of this? He wasn't saved, first of all, from dying as a result of starvation. Rather, Yad al Tishluchu by Reuven says, let's just not kill him, we'll just put him into this pit. But he could still die from starvation. Furthermore, we said that the pit was filled with snakes and scorpions. So practically, Yosef was not even saved as a result of all of this. Even though Pshut Mikra, of course, we could say Reuven didn't know that this was the danger of the pit, and therefore he's not at fault. But practically, Yosef, as a result of what Reuven said, Yosef didn't leave his sakana, and he was in danger. So too, when it comes to the tshuva of Reuven, Reuven is involved in his sackcloth and his fasting because he moved his father's bed. But again, this is not something that impacted and helped somebody else. Furthermore, if Reuven would have not been involved in his sackcloth and his fasting during the time of the sale of Yosef, which he missed because of his own tshuva, so possibly he would have found some way to save Yosef, just like he influenced them earlier not to actually kill him. Maybe he would have managed somehow to bring Yosef back to his father. It's specifically because he's involved with his own great things of tshuva, sackcloth and fasting. But at the end of the day, he's just involved with himself, that it ends up being that as a result of this, Yosef is sold. And therefore, when we look at the story of Miterev B'nai Elisa, that Yehuda ends up saving Yosef, and also putting himself out and admitting in the story of Tamar, in both of these cases, it's something that practically goes ahead and practically ends up having a benefit in saving somebody else. This is the proof that he is deserving of Malchus, which, as we explained before, Malchus is about helping other people, as opposed to the Reuven. And notwithstanding how great his tshuva was and how great character he was, and all of that, that's still all milus in regards to himself, that he is deserving b'chayra. Yes, generally it's true, but not roy l'melucha, not roy to be a king. Says that Rebbe, now we can also understand simply why Rashi explains Miterev B'nai Elisa, he includes both things, Mechiras Yosef and Ma'aser Tamar, which we asked before. Seemingly, why do we even have to say that the pasuk is hinting to the story of Tamar over here? So the Rebbe says Yaakov is trying to bring out the Maila of Yehuda compared to the Reuven, and this is why he is going to be given the Melucha, Gur Aryeh, Yehuda, etc. He's going to be given the Melucha instead of Reuven. Now, since in regards to Reuven we find two very, very special things that he did. He wanted to save Yosef, and for so many years he was involved in this tshuva for moving his father's bed. Therefore, it makes sense to say that when we're speaking about Yehuda, we want to bring out his advantage in both of these areas. And therefore, Rashi mentions both the story of saving Yosef and the story of the tshuva and the saving of Tamar. Says the Rebbe, the Hoira of all of this is very, very simply understood. A Yid could never suffice by just taking care of his own shleimus, his own perfection. He needs to be involved in Avas Yisrael. You need to be involved in doing a favor for another Yid. Furthermore, Avas Yisrael is kol HaTorah kula. This is the whole Torah. So even if perhaps maybe you might not be on such a high level as somebody else that's completely involved in trying to gain higher levels for himself, but if you're involved in the benefit for the favor of another Yid, this is really connected now with Kol HaTorah Kula. Furthermore, says the Rebbe, let's have a look at the results of Reuven's conduct and Yehuda's. As a result of Reuven being involved in all of his great levels of tshuva, sakev, v'tam, nisoi, but what it ends up enabling is Mechiras Yosef and then Golus Mitzrayim, which is the source for all the other Goliaths. On the other hand, Yehuda, who says Tzadka mimeni, and he saves Tamar. So even though it's nowhere close to the level of tshuva of Reuven, but nevertheless, as a result of this, now the whole Geula is dependent on this, the Geula out of Golus, because as a result of this, Tamar's son, Yehuda and Tamar's son, Peretz is born, from whom Malchus Beis David comes, all the way till Melech HaMashiach, who's called Allah HaPoretz L'Faneim, etc., who's the last Redeemer, the one who will break the boundaries of Golus, and will bring the Geula, Ha'amitis V'Ashleima B'Korev Mamash.